And they're starting to come. All right, welcome students to the WACAC Virtual College Exploration Program. My name is Kate Virgo. I work at Beloit College, but I'm here in a capacity as a WACAC volunteer. So I'll be moderating your session today, just doing some housekeeping reminders and then wrapping things up at the end. So students, if you have questions, you'll see the Q&A button to type your questions to the presenters at any time. Your camera and microphone are off. You're muted. They can't see or hear you, so that's what the Q&A button is for. And we've got a number of sessions on the schedule. This is one of many, so we encourage you to check out the rest of the schedule at www.wacac.com. All sessions are being recorded and will be available on the website. So if you enjoy this session and want to share it with a friend, we encourage you to do that. We should be finishing up by about 5:45. So with that, I'm going to turn my camera off and mute myself, and then I'm going to turn it over to our panelists.
Thanks, Galen, for doing that. I want to welcome everyone. We are super excited to have you guys here today. Again, hoping everyone's doing well and your week's off to a great start on this lovely Monday. On behalf of myself, Karin, and Galen, I would like to welcome you all to our session on the college interview. We're really excited that you're joining us tonight and hope that our session can help you feel more prepared as you really begin your college search process. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive on in. So kind of to start off, obviously you can see who we are a little bit, but I want to take a second before we get into some more about the actual interview and as the title indicates, the who, the what, the where, the why, and more importantly, how. So kind of starting off, I want to acknowledge that in the world of admissions, the interview can go by a number of different names. So some are very general, others may be branded specifically to that institution. So for example, at Lake Forest, when we're in the office, we refer to them as admissions chat. When I'm on the road in Wisconsin on a Saturday, setting up at a Collectivo coffee shop, they're coffee chats. So as you go through your college search process and you're trying to understand the various materials that you need to complete your application or opportunities to connect with your admissions counselor, just keep in mind that what one college refers to their interview as, another may call it something completely different. So when in doubt, ask for clarification. To make it easy though, tonight, we'll pretty much be referring to them as interviews. Gayla, if you don't mind. So the college interview can be one of the most nerve-wracking parts of the admissions process for students. And the idea that the person that you're meeting with holds the future of your admissions decision in their hand can be downright terrifying. Trust me, I understand. But honestly, it's one of the most important parts of the admissions process, in my personal opinion. We can only get so much information from your application about who you are as a person, And we know that there's so much more to you than your grades, your test scores, your letters of recommendation, etc. So the interview is your chance to really show us who you are. The interview is designed to help colleges to understand what you value and what you're passionate about outside of the classroom as well as in. Your interests and your passions can also help us to connect you with various campus partners. And smaller institutions like ours love to personalize your experience with our campuses to help make sure that you have all the information that you need to make a very informed decision when selecting your college. And your interview really sets us up to be able to do that. It also helps us to get a better sense for your fit within our community and an idea as to how you would perform in our classrooms by demonstrating a lot of those soft skills that we may not necessarily be able to tease out from an application. So things like your demeanor, your personality, creativity, inquisitive, etc. And the interview isn't necessarily a one-way street though. So in a way, you're interviewing us. And this is your chance to really learn more about who we are, ask a lot of questions to help you figure out if this institution, it will be the right place for you. So if anything, just remember that fit goes both ways. And so what your interview may look like, it depends on which institution you're looking at. The short answer really is that it varies across. Even if the format is similar, the institution may be looking for some different information. So some interviews are designed to be used just to evaluate you as a candidate for admissions, while others are used as a piece of your application to round out that holistic review process. And depending on what the school is looking for, that style will often adapt to those needs. So at Lake Forest, for example, we prefer using a conversational style, which allows us to naturally find out more about you through general conversations and questions. We're not looking for a right answer. We're not looking for anything other than your experience, what you want to provide, and the information that you give us. Some schools will have you interview with members of the community outside the admissions team to provide with some additional perspective. So you may find that you'll interview with an alumni of the college or a few current students or some of the admissions interns. And if you interview with those students or alumni, they can give you more insight into the student experience from a firsthand perspective. So make sure that you're asking them tons of questions. And as mentioned, smaller institutions like ours have a very personal approach to the admissions process. So we want to make sure that we're meeting our students where they're at, not just in a pandemic year where everything just has changed. This means that we offer multiple ways for you to complete your interview. So while you're on campus doing your tour, you may finish your interview after your tour or before your tour. If it's off campus, when we're all traveling, going to a local coffee shop and just kind of hanging out for a little while, Skype or Zoom calls, or even phone calls. If there's a method that you're more comfortable with or you feel you would be set up for success better with, always reach out to your admissions counselor to see if there are other options. And just as a reminder, for those of you that are interested in attending a performing arts school for music, art, theater, oftentimes your interview may consist of an audition or submitting a portfolio as part of that interview. And if you're unsure as to what your interview is going to be like, please don't hesitate to contact your admissions counselor beforehand. We're always happy to answer questions to make sure that you feel confident going into that interview. So whether it's asking who's going to be involved or what questions should you be prepared to answer, we're here to help make sure this as great of an experience as possible for you. And with that, I will hand it over.
Good evening. My name is Karen Smith, and I am the Midwest Regional Admission Manager at Beloit College in Beloit, Wisconsin. And I'm thrilled to be here with all of you this evening and with my two colleagues, Galen and Emily. First, I want to recognize that for the three of us, this sucks, right? We are in this profession because we enjoy meeting students and families personally. And yes, I said the S word. I did, because we're talking about something that we typically have the pleasure of doing in person. and we simply don't have that pleasure this year. So we're gonna make it work. I want to reiterate what Emily said, and that is, we will talk with you in whatever way works best for you. And sometimes as I go through a day lately, I think to myself, has the whole world forgotten how to make a phone call? Right? Like, do we have to Zoom everything? Really? Like, could we just talk on the phone? And so any of you who choose to reach out to me and say, could we talk on the phone? You'll be my new favorite person for at least the next week. Although most of you don't talk on the phone. So we're going to talk about this very personal thing we're doing via Zoom, and recognize that as soon as we're able to meet you in person, we will do that. Oftentimes I'm asked by students, when should I interview, right? And so there's kind of three basic times that are going to work. When you're simply exploring colleges, is not necessarily the greatest time to interview, because you don't know a lot about us yet and we don't know a lot about you, and it might be somewhat uncomfortable to sit down with someone like me and say, just tell me about your school, knowing that you have the opportunity to do that in an information session. However, if it's going to be the one time that you're able to meet with us, whether it's on our campus or it's because you have a calendar that looks completely crazy, I would tell you, interview and meet with us whenever is going to work. So if it's at the exploration stage and you have an opportunity to meet with us, we probably can get done very quickly what you're hoping to get done and answer questions that are very specific to you. So that's certainly fine. I think most admission counselors would tell you we love to meet with students when they are about to apply or they already have applied. Why? Because we know that you love us enough to have applied to our school, and we also have some information about you via your application. And so it helps us to really kind of round out what we know we're going to read or that we already have read in your application. As Emily mentioned, an application is two-dimensional, and a student, even via Zoom, is much more three-dimensional. And so it brings that color commentary, that three-dimensional aspect to your application. We can ask you information very specific to you, and you can ask us information that's very specific to you as well. Post-decision, so you found out you've been admitted, and that's your opportunity to meet with us, either because it's the only time that will work or because you now have more questions for us. Interviewing with us post-decision is fine as well, right? And sometimes that will be the second time. What we want to do is to be able to provide you with all of the information that you need in order to make a college decision that you can feel comfortable with. So any of these three times are going to look a little different, but all of them are appropriate and can be dictated by you. Oh, how do you prepare for your interview? Well, we're going to give you some information about that. Preparing for an interview, right? You'll do this probably a lot more in your life other than during the college application process, but it also might be the first time that you've done this. Unless you've applied for a job, formally interviewed for a job, this might be the first time you're going through this. And so what we would do would be to tell you to prepare, right? So learn about the school that you're meeting with. Have some questions in advance if you don't have those already. This is a perfect time to collect questions from others that are helping you through this process, your parents, your guardians, and then ask those questions to us during the interview. Be sure to read the instructions, right? Because nothing is worse than showing up in the wrong place or on the wrong Zoom link for your interview. So reading the instructions as to what to expect and how to accomplish this, for sure. Have specific questions. Nothing pleases me more than when a student sits down to meet with me and either takes out their phone and says, I have a list of questions, or a piece of paper, I have a list of questions. And it almost always goes like this: I'm sorry, but I have a list of questions. Or, do you mind? I have a list of questions. And I always say, oh, thank goodness, right? So it's never an I'm sorry. It's never a do you mind. From our vantage point, it's like, bring it on. Yep, let's get going here. Let's get your questions answered. So please prepare those ahead of time. And then practice, right? So if you are a person who's very comfortable to sit down and talk with individuals that you don't know about things that are kind of important, then you're probably all good. If that's something that you're not necessarily comfortable with, or you're nervous that you might be comfortable with, you can practice. You can practice in the mirror, you can practice with a friend, you can practice with any of us, actually. I will be so bold as to say any of the three of us would be happy to do a practice interview with you, even if our schools are not anywhere on your list of college considerations. We will certainly do that. If you were able to get in touch with all three of my children who are now college graduates, they would tell you that I made them do this, right? And they were like, Mom, seriously? I'm like, no, seriously, you just need to practice this. And we talked about things like making eye contact, which is important. We talked about handshakes. You know, these days it would be a handshake like this. We talked about taking notes. We talked about just being comfortable and knowing that nothing usually is going to be made or broken in an interview. Certainly helped along for sure. So kind of know who you are and your level of comfort, and feel free to practice. Oh, recommendations for success, right? So some of this we've already talked about before. Do your research, dress appropriately. So I get asked this question quite often, like, how should I dress? And I tend to say dress in something that you might wear to an event, not necessarily the prom, but something that you would wear to an event. Maybe not ripped up jeans and t-shirts and anything that's written on a t-shirt that you might not want your mother to see. But by all means, be comfortable. If you are not comfortable sitting for 45 minutes in a tie, don't wear a tie. Just don't, because it sets you up for not feeling comfortable about any of it. No gum, please don't chew gum. Turn your cell phone off. I will tell you a story. It's a very embarrassing story. Galen's laughing because she knows this story. So with my oldest daughter, we went on a college visit, and she was meeting with kind of a high profile person because she was a recruited athlete. And as we walked in, he was meeting with the entire family. And so as we walked in, I said to her, did you turn your phone off? And she gave me that look like, yeah. And then during the interview, my phone rang. And it was a meeting. It was very embarrassing. So you want to turn your, and don't have it on vibrate. Because nothing is funnier than when you have your phone in your back pocket and it starts vibrating and you're trying to ignore it, but it's vibrating and I can hear it and you're trying to ignore it. So I encourage you to just not even bring it into the room necessarily, unless you have questions in your phone, which is fine, but be sure to have it turned off and not vibrating. I would encourage you not to necessarily try to have an agenda, not try to dictate the conversation and the interview, how it's going to go. Emily and Galen and I do this every day, lots. We have a pattern that works for us and for our individual school. We will indeed provide you with plenty of opportunity to talk about yourself and to ask the questions that you have. So I would encourage you to kind of be willing to go with the flow. This is a good time to talk about anything that's impacted your high school experience, whether it's positive or negative. You may not necessarily want to put into your application, or you have put it into your application and you want to be able to talk about it instead of just write about it. I think for me, when I meet with students this year, a very standard question is going to be, tell me about how you're studying. Tell me about how that's going. Tell me about what you see on the future as far as how studying will go for the remainder of this year. I always ask students to tell me about their individual high school, even if I know about the school. I love to hear it in students' words. Yes, BU. We write up interview notes usually after we've met with the student, and we put all kinds of great things in there. And so by all means, be authentic. What we're trying to do in the college search process from our end is to figure out what students are going to really thrive on our campuses. And so if we're not meeting the authentic you, that's difficult for us to answer. Follow up if necessary, right? So if you meet with someone who can't answer all your questions, usually we're pretty good about saying, I'll get back to you about that. If you get in the car, this happened twice in my experience as a mom, we would get in the car and I would say, so did you ask this question? And my child would say to me, no. And I would say, well, it might be an important question. So you certainly can follow up if questions come up after the fact. I'm also going to remind all of you, yes, so we have some great questions already. Galen's going to talk with us for a few minutes, and then we will answer these questions absolutely. Galen?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Galen, and I am an Associate Director of Admission at Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin. As Karen was just kind of mentioning, just a reminder that we have that Q&A chat function. So you can go ahead and send questions anytime while I'm chatting, and then we will be following up just in about 10 more minutes. So one of the things that really terrified me as a high school student was I just had no idea what I was walking into. And so Emily and Karen have given us a really great idea of how to prepare and how to get ready. And as you're practicing, I think it's really important to have a little bit of background on what kind of questions we might ask you. For me, this was something I did not think of. I honestly fixated on, I think, everything else. I was a very low income first generation student. And I remember my entire English class having a full discussion on what I should wear. And I'd never been to a Starbucks before, so I needed to know what to order, like what was a smart coffee drink that didn't make me look like I was too dumb for your college. None of those things ended up being important. And the first question that came out of the interviewer's mouth, I had no idea how to answer, which was just, tell me about yourself. Not actually a question most interviewers recommend asking because it's a very hard question to answer, right? You have no idea how long to talk or what they want to know. Well, I was born here, and then, it can range quite a bit. So you maybe have a little brief one prepared for that, but most institutions are going to ask more specific questions. Not a lot of yes or no questions, things that'll tell us more about you specifically though. Karen mentioned a few of those that I think will be really topical this year. Tell me about what happened in your junior year. How did you pivot to virtual learning? Tell me about what's going on in your school senior year. There's so many of those questions that you know the answer to, right? So have a lot of confidence in remembering that. We'll often ask you something specific to the institution. How did Lawrence get on your list? Why are you interested in Lawrence? Anything like that. You should probably have an answer ready for that one as well. Otherwise, we look a little silly because we're just showing up. Also, if that reason is, my mom put it on my list, I know nothing about it, now is a good time to prepare a better answer than that. We can talk a little bit more about what you're involved with inside of the classroom. We might ask about certain projects that you're doing. What is your favorite assignment been? Things outside of the classroom. Tell me about what clubs or organizations you're a part of. How do you get involved with your community? This year, we know that might look a little bit different for you, right? So those clubs and organizations that you were involved in last year may be different this year, or your schedule may have changed. That is a great time to expand upon that a little bit. Ask how that might affect your application, or how should you reflect that in your application. An interview is a great opportunity to start getting those application tips and tricks as well. And as Karen briefly mentioned as well, anything that we should be aware of. So this might be you had one really bad semester because you were out with the flu for 3 weeks and you missed a bunch of work, or yes, I had a slow start to high school, but I've really grown quite a bit and I'm taking more APs now and I'm really proud of that. Or I didn't have access to this class that I really wanted to take. So I know it looks funny that I want to be a psychology major and I didn't get to take the AP psych class I had signed up for, but anything that we want to talk more about, this is your time to really call attention to that too. There are questions that can throw you off though, and we wanted to forewarn you. Often these are interviewers' favorite questions, not because we're trying to trick you or make you uncomfortable or catch you off guard, but because most of the time we can get to know you best by these questions that get to a little bit more of the core of who you are. So I think we spend so much time in our college search thinking about the classes and the clubs and everything you have to do to get yourself on a resume. But it's the things that aren't on your resume that often are what you're most passionate about or what you're most excited for in your day. So thinking about how you spent some time outside of class or clubs. Often I will actually end an interview if students seem really uncomfortable or not thrilled with how things are going. I will ask them to share something that they're proud of because it can be a good reminder for you of all the successes that you've had in a process where sometimes we can just feel really judged. We might ask you something about your high school. What would you change? What would you never change? If you could be principal for a day, what role would you enact? All kinds of fun things, just thinking about your own environment. Anything that's unique, what would you add to our community? What's something special that you're excited about for college? What's something you've never tried before that you want to try in college? These aren't often questions that you can predict in advance, right? They're purposefully uncommon. But just remembering that when you walk into an interview, we want to get to know who you are, and also that it's okay to take pause. It's okay to say, that's a really great question. Can I think about it for a few seconds? If nothing comes to you, as Karin said, you should be taking notes if you have it available. You can always say, I am just blanking right now. I'm going to write it down and try and come back to this at the end. Is that okay? And often I love when students do that because I think we all have those moments where we kind of flub or just can't come to mind. And coming back to it's not a bad thing. It's just showing that you want to be intentional with your questions and answers. And then lastly, I purposefully asked to give this slide because as a high school senior, I did not drive. I made my mom drive me to my interview and I made her sit in the car in Miami with no air conditioning in 110-degree heat. That was probably too far, but I love my mother. I don't think she's watching right now, but if she is, she would probably appreciate this apology. The important thing to keep in mind, though, that I think I did right, is you do call the shots. If you would like a parent to be there, you can certainly invite them if the school allows that. If you would not like a parent there, it's a good conversation to have with your parents in advance to set that expectation that this is my process and it's really important for me to show my independence. It's really important for me to do this on my own. I don't know any parents that wouldn't respect that, but you know, it's a conversation to have in advance because it's very awkward when you're in our lobby and we come back to chat with you about who wants to come back and you're trying to duke it out right there. If your parents are there with you, remembering that this is still your interview, not your parents'. This often happens when we interview in coffee shops, or now even that we interview via Zoom in your home, right? Your parent might be just behind the computer screen or peeking in from that doorway. We understand that, but also we want to hear from you as a student because you're the one who's going to be on our campus. You'll be in our classrooms, you'll be in our community. At the end, often we will start out by saying, we're going to talk to you as the student first, and then we would love to have your parent join us for some questions and answers. And that's a chance for us to both get the best of both worlds, right? Get to know you, but then bring in mom, dad, guardian, whoever you may be staying with right now, to get their questions answered. And sometimes it's honestly really lovely when they bring up that little point to brag about you that you may have forgotten. Just this past year, I had a student who forgot to tell me she climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. It's right, I know, but she was just embarrassed. It didn't come up, and it was really nice to have someone remind us of that. And then just keeping in mind that with the environment we're in now, all schools have different policies about what privacy looks like in a virtual world. So we may have to do a phone interview versus a Zoom interview if we cannot have more than one person, or if we're required to have more than one person on a screen with us. Or we may ask, are your parents available? We require a parent to be in the room as part of an interview. Asking those questions of your admissions representatives are very helpful just to understand exactly what to expect. If they ask to interview with you, it is perfectly normal to respond and say, absolutely, would you like a parent to be involved at all? Or is it okay if I interview on my own? My parents are working, things like that. We're always happy to answer those questions. And speaking of questions, I will turn it back over to Karin to hear all the great questions that I see you all have been asking us as well.
Okay, great. And we have some very good questions. And Emily, I'm actually going to ask you to respond to this question, if you would. We have a question that says, should I bring a resume to my interview?
So I personally love when my students bring resumes to their interviews, especially because it gets you kind of in the mindset, and Karin, I think you mentioned this too, where it gets you in the mindset of treating it sort of like a job interview in that sense. But it's this nice, concise way of seeing all of your activities, your accomplishments, your involvement, and especially in a year like this where it might get a little bit tricky to kind of explain how you were involved in various activities and organizations, and maybe it's just an extension of what you've put in your application. But personally, I love when students bring those in. I think it's one of my favorite things.
Thank you. Galen, anything to add to that?
Yeah, so even beyond a resume, or if you don't have a resume, sometimes some of the funnest moments in my interviews are students showing me something that they're passionate about or excited about. So for example, I had a student who was interested in costume design and theater and had some pictures on their phone to say, yeah, look at these great things I've done. Or a student that built the Titanic out of Legos. Those things are great if you have something to share and you're in more of that conversational, more casual interview. I think it's a lovely way to show who you are. I do think it can go a little too far. For example, also being a conservatory of music, sometimes, typically not a student, often a parent will bring out a performance that they're proud of that might be 8, 9, 10 minutes. And we don't have time to watch that in the middle of a 30 to 40 minute interview. So just keeping whatever it is you're showing us brief is often helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. A student asked, should I take notes on what my counselor is saying during the interview, or will I look distracted if I do so? You will not look distracted. You should feel free to absolutely take notes. We can be patient. We want you to walk away with the information that you need, and so you should not worry about that at all. You agree, right, Galen and Emily? Yeah, okay, good. Here's a question. Go ahead.
I would just add, if you're taking notes on your phone, you've forgotten paper or something, do maybe just ask, is it okay if I take some notes on my phone so it doesn't look like you're just texting through our interview? It's only happened like once, but it was a little weird.
Yeah, good point, for sure. Galen, I'm going to ask you to respond to this because I know that you have managed and trained student interns in the past. And so there's a question: if the applicant is interviewed by a college student or alum, and the high schooler does not feel the interviewer was attentive or polite to them, should the student mention this to the admissions department? People I know that have had this happen in the past felt it would be held against them if they mentioned anything.
Oh, I was also this student. Yes, please do. In a as factual and straightforward way as you can tell us that information, we truly do appreciate it, because often an alumni or a student interviewer, while they have been trained, while they're a representative of the university, is not a full admissions counselor. They may not be doing hundreds of these interviews a year. They might be doing 3 interviews a year. They may be 40 years removed from having actually taken classes at said university. While they're often a great resource, and I would say 98 times out of 100 are fabulous representatives of the university, that person who makes an inappropriate remark or just may not show those same values as the university as you were hoping to see, we want to know about that too, because that's not the face that we're looking to show either, right? And it can be even something as a simple correction. It might be something more dramatic. I know these questions can range quite a bit, but we always want to know that, and it's truly appreciated. If you are uncomfortable having that conversation with your admissions counselor, if you have a college counselor or someone who is working with you on your application, that person can also reach out on your behalf if that makes you more comfortable. I would say both of those ways are absolutely okay, and we truly appreciate that feedback, including with our own admissions counselors. I should also say sometimes we can find ourselves just used to asking the same questions or things like that, and sometimes it helps to bring things to our attention.
Emily, did you want to add anything?
I think that was perfect.
Yeah, I would say the same. Yeah, absolutely. I knew Galen would kill that. Emily, how long will my interview take? Is a question.
So it depends on your institution. I know for us, we typically block out about a half hour. If you're doing your interview before your tour, we kind of have to make sure we adhere to that half hour so we can actually get you out on tour. If it's afterwards and you don't have any other meetings, sometimes it goes a little bit longer. I think from my experience, most really are between 30 and 45 minutes at most. I really haven't heard of any that go longer, but it's a question to ask if it's not clear from your itinerary or your conversation with your admissions counselor how long that interview is going to be. I would just ask and see how long you should prepare for that to be.
Yep, good. There's another question, and I'm not 100% sure I'm getting the grasp of this. What would a college day look like for someone with a disability? A college day for someone with a disability would look different on different college campuses and different according to what the disability might be. And so I think that's such an appropriate question to ask during an interview. Most colleges and universities are going to be well prepared to answer that question for you. And if we're not, we're going to get you pointed in the right direction to someone who can answer that question for you. This is kind of the bliss of interviews, because we get to get very specific with students and families. Another question, can I ask my interviewer about my chances of being admitted? You can. I think you can. Now, I've heard other admissions officers say no. I say you can. And I think when students do that for me, none of us is going to be able to tell you emphatically, you are a shoo-in. You will absolutely positively be admitted. We also are not in a position to say, no, you will absolutely positively not be admitted. We don't know that because most of us work at colleges and universities where we're not the only person making a decision about a student's application. But what we will do is to take everything we know about you into account and then point you in the direction of what we do know in regards to your chances of being admitted. And we can point you to some information that will help you know what the answer, what the outcome, what the final decision might be. And we're happy to do that. Galen or Emily, do you want to, Galen, say something more, huh?
Yeah, one of the best, this is actually a trick I learned interviewing for jobs, not for colleges, but one of the best questions that someone taught me to ask was to say, do you have any concerns about my application? It's the backwards way of asking, right? Not, so am I admissible? Or if they're saying, oh, we can't tell you if you're admissible, it's against our policy, you can say, well, are there any concerns that I can address about my application? Because it also gives you an opportunity to respond if there's something that they might be concerned about. Maybe you weren't able to be a part of a lot of clubs because you were caring for siblings or have family responsibilities or are working. Being able to just respond to those questions often gives us a lot of great information.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Galen on that. I think me and my colleagues, we're very much, if we see something that's of a concern on an application, we'll kind of address it and just see if we can kind of tease out some more context as to what happened. Maybe it's a blip on a transcript or, again, a lack of involvement due to, family contributions, stuff like that. But, really by just kind of asking if there are any concerns that we have, it kind of puts the onus a little bit back on us to make sure that we're looking at your application as in depth as we should be, to make sure that we're getting that full picture. And if there's anything that we need clarification of, we make sure that we can get it right then in that moment.
Thank you. Okay, Galen's gonna flip to the next slide so you can see our contact information. We have time for one more question. And then if you need more from us, here's how you can get in touch with us. But Galen and Emily, if you could answer this question would be great. Are there any things I should not share or questions I should not ask during my interview?
As far as questions you should not ask, I think it is okay to ask about things like, what is the social life like on campus? I do think it's really uncomfortable when students ask particularly about, oh, I hear you have this specific rager of a party. Can you tell me about this like famous frat party that you all host? Which is not true at Lawrence, is true at my previous institution. But no, actually, I can't, because if I went to it, it would be super weird as an admissions counselor, right? There are some questions that just make more sense for students. And it's not that it's not a valid question. It's just that I'm not the right person to respond to it. In terms of topics not to be discussed, I can't think of any. I just think we know that some topics are hard topics. Some topics are traumatic topics. And every year we'll have students who cry during interviews or are emotional about information that they're sharing with that. More than anything, we often appreciate you feeling, trusting us with that information and being willing to be vulnerable in that space. We are not asking you or requiring you to do that in any way. So only talk what you're comfortable about. Or what you're comfortable with, but often focusing on how you came back from a traumatic experience. It's the same advice we give students when they're writing their essay about something very difficult. How have you grown? How have you come back? How have you come out of that challenge is a great place to place focus rather than just on the whatever that thing may have been that happened to you that might be difficult to broach. Emily, do you have anything to add there?
I think you were spot on. The social life aspect, in my previous institutions, I've gotten the, like, what are the college parties like? It's like, it's not my place. So I don't know. Definitely, I definitely echo Galen's sentiment. So if you're willing to share and be vulnerable with us, we do appreciate that. A lot of times in this profession, we get seen as these, gatekeepers in a way, and so we get put on pedestals and stuff. But really, we're humans, and we have empathy. We understand that life can get in the way, And so if you're willing and you're comfortable with us to be that vulnerable, we appreciate that. And we just, you know, it helps. I know for me personally, it helps me build a stronger relationship with my students when they feel that comfortable around me. So.
All right. The other thing to know is if you're telling us something that was difficult for you to tell us, we don't broadcast, we keep that to ourselves, right? We use only snippets of it that would be necessary in helping to advocate for your admission to our school, but it doesn't follow you into any magic file anywhere. So yeah, our time is up. And so I want to thank all of you for spending time with us in yet another Zoom platform. Our contact information is available on the screen. We are happy to do practice interviews with you. We're happy to answer questions that you may have for us, either via a phone call or an email. Kate, we're done.
Great. Well, thank you. I hope that that was educational for everyone. And let me put up our thank you slide here. For our participants, you'll get a quick survey about this. Again, encourage you to sign up for more sessions at wacac.com, and the recording will be available as well if you want to replay it or share it with someone you know. So thank you again all for participating. And again, if there's any questions that just got submitted or went unanswered, we'll follow up with you afterwards. So thanks again.